Brian here for part 3 of our Triad Arpeggio lesson, and you probably guessed, now we're going to look at a diminished triad on 2 strings throughout the fretboard. And if you haven't looked at parts 1 and 2 of the lesson, I suggest taking a look because I went over triads and inversions, and we're now going to talk about those same ideas, this time for diminished triads. So let's go. Let's look at a B diminished triad. Why B? Well, because B is the 7th degree of the C major scale. And as we saw in part 1, the 7th degree is that really odd one that produces a diminished triad type. I could have chosen G major as the key, and in that case I would have chosen F sharp as the diminished triad, because F sharp is the 7th degree of G major. So the idea is to look at that 7th degree of a major scale and understand that it's a diminished triad, and now we're going to see how to play that all over the neck. You'll recall from part 1 that we define a diminished triad as a minor third followed by a minor third. So if we go to B, B to D is a minor third, D to F is another minor third. So let's do the same thing we did in part 1, where we looked at a root position triad and then its first and second inversions, and figured out how using that lets us play an arpeggio all over the place. So to play the root position, let's go to a B, so a 12th fret B string. And remember I talked about form 1 and form 2, where form 1 is when we have one note on the lower string, and form 2 is when we have 2 notes on the lower string. So form 1, B diminished triad, we play the B on the B string, B, D, F. Form 2 is when we play 2 notes on the B string. So again, B, D, F. And now we move on to the first inversion, which is where we take the D and make that the lower note, and then play the remaining notes. So D, F, and then if you have insanely big hands, you could play that stretch. Might be easier to play lower down in the neck. That's form 1. Form 2 is quite a bit easier to pull off. No crazy stretches there. And now moving on to the second inversion, we start at the F and then play the remaining notes of the triad. Or higher up. And then form 2 is going to be quite a bit tougher because of the stretch, but again the same notes. So that's how we can play a diminished triad throughout the neck using the root position and the inversions. And now we're going to do the same thing we did in parts 1 and 2, where we're going to play an exercise that has you reinforcing those different shapes to get your hand used to that kind of position shifting. So here's the tab, and like I did in part 1 and 2, I'm using additional notes from the C major scale since we're continuing to use C major as our example here. And that's just to make things more interesting, since it'd be pretty boring if you just played the arpeggio notes straight up continuously. And like you saw in parts 1 and 2, there's quite a bit of position shifting involved, and I show in the tab the slides and recommended fingerings that I think work well for this exercise. So there'll be a 2-bar count in, and then you play on the 3rd bar. And again, like I did in parts 1 and 2, here it is up to speed. So here's the tab, 16th notes at 150 beats a minute. And like I said before, practice this at whatever tempo you're comfortable with. The idea here is to build coordination using an exercise that forces your coordination to become unconscious, so you can focus more on music and less on technique. So there'll be a 2-bar count in, and I'll start on the 3rd bar. Now in this third part of the lesson, we've covered major, minor, and diminished triads. You know how to play them throughout the fretboard using the idea of inversions. And now let's move on to part 4, the final part of the lesson, and figure out how we can combine these different arpeggio types into something that's maybe a little bit more musical.